Mr. Zhangazha, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. I'm very much happy to have you to discuss the article that you recently published on your blog, Zimbabwe's Land Compensation Deal. Can you just briefly describe the views that you raise in this article?
Well, the views that I raised in the blog are basically to say that the compensation deal, which is called the Global Compensation Deal by the Zimbabwean government with the Commercial Farmers Union, as well as two other farmers associations in Southern Africa, is one that sanctifies or makes a priority private property, and is essentially intended to guarantee a perpetual inequality between those that got land unjustly with the majority of Zimbabwe's population.
Oh, well, I see. I do have a couple of questions for you. And the first question that I have is with regards to the colonial land policies that were enacted during the colonial times that resulted in the inequalities that caused the segregation that was now trying to be redressed by the Fast Track Land Reform Program. Could you just briefly take us through that colonial history of what actually caused and what provoked the government to redress the imbalance by way of redistributing the land?
Okay, that's a very complicated question, but essentially the main reason why we have an issue with the compensation deal as it has occurred now is because one of the main reasons for fighting for Zimbabwe's liberation was the question of land. And the desire for a majority of the Zimbabwean people to have their land that was unfairly taken away from them during the colonial era returned to them. And this was done largely through legal measures such as the Land Apportionment Act, the Native Land Husbandry Act, amongst many others. And these acts were then used to justify and formalize the acquisition of land by minority settlers before independence. And the formalization was basically to say, once you've acquired this land unfairly and justly, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this land is now your own private property for those that acquired this land forcefully so. And they then integrated that into a global system of capitalism, a global system of private property rights, wherein they could now use that land as collateral, yet they had acquired it unjustly and unfairly from the majority of Zimbabwe's population. So in brief, that would be a history of how we've come to where we are insofar as we're looking at Rhodesia. But when we look at post-independence Zimbabwe, we had what we now refer to as the Fast Track Land Reform Program, which was a government initiative under the ruling ZANU-PF party to repossess land that they felt was unjustly taken from Zimbabweans by a white minority regime. And therefore they did it in ways that many still consider questionable and unfairly violent. But in principle, the issue of the repossession of lands back to the majority of the people of Zimbabwe is not questioned. And this is something that happened in 2000 to 2010. But the government then made an obligation in the new constitution that it would compensate those former farmers that had their land taken away from them under the Fast Track Land Reform Program for things that they built or the biology that they had acquired on the land that they lost from 2000. And hence the global compensation deal has become some sort of reality at the moment.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you very much for that response. So has the government provided a comprehensive plan to try and raise money for this compensation process?
Well, what the government has said in this global compensation deal, we can call it the GCD, is it has said that it will raise 3.5 billion United States dollars to compensate the former white commercial farmers. And it will do so by, putting out debt instruments on the global financial markets to try and get people who are interested to guarantee that this money will be acquired, and that it will do so over a phased period, the first being in the next 12 months, and it will pay at least half of the 3.5 billion United States dollars required to those that have applied for compensation. And an interesting point about this is the fact that governments did a mini referendum of former white commercial farmers, in which at least 94% agreed to this deal. And this deal is, however, not necessarily a deal that the people of Zimbabwe knew before, but the government is using constitutional provisions as a means to justify the fact that they are entering into this deal. The key question, though, is who shoulders the burden of the debt of the 3.5 billion United States dollars. And from what I've read in the deal, it is largely public debts, and therefore it is on the shoulders of Zimbabweans that this compensation deal will be paid out.
Okay, thank you for that. I've been reading some articles that were published recently around the issue of the land compensation, and I saw one article that said that the Economic Freedom Fighters, that is one of the main political opposition parties in South Africa, criticized this move by the Zimbabwean government to compensate white farmers, and they said that it is a way of reversing the gains of the liberation struggle. Looking at it historically and legally, is it justified?
Well, the EFF is entitled to its own opinion. Legally, there is no reversal in the strict sense of the term, because in terms of the Zimbabwean constitution, Zimbabwe is obliged to come up with some sort of compensation plan for land acquired under the fast-track land reform program. But in terms of the national historiography, let alone historical consciousness of the Zimbabwean people, this deal would be something that they can critically question, particularly in regards to the fact that they're compensating former white commercial farmers on the basis of the fact that they improved land which they acquired unjustly and unfairly. And this is something that obviously does not resonate well with the whole purpose of the liberation struggle. So the EFF is partly correct to argue that this may be a reversal of the gains of, or the intentions of the liberation struggle, insofar as it relates to compensating improvements on land that was illegally, unfairly acquired at the onset of colonialism in Zimbabwe. But be that as it may, we may need to ask more questions about why government is doing this particular deal at this particular time. And for me, the immediate answer is that government has taken on a neoliberal sort of like free market approach and wants to guarantee its placements in global economics by saying, oh yeah, we took the land back in the 2000s, and now we're saying we'll compensate you, so get us back into the global economic system because we now respect private property rights, or at least we're compensating for private property rights losses. I think that is inherently probably unfair to the Zimbabwean people, because they cannot be shouldering the burden of paying back for compensation, paying back compensation for land that was in the first place not acquired fairly.
Oh, well, I see. I've actually noted that Zimbabwe lost a very significant international trust upon the implementation of this fast-track land reform program in the early 2000s. And as a result of the human rights and political violence that characterized the whole land reform process, Zimbabwe was put under limited economic sanctions by the United States and the European Union. Would this move of trying to compensate these former white commercial farmers $3.5 billion, would this move restore the confidence that was lost? And would it also gather the necessary momentum for the removal of sanctions?
Well, on the face of it, and particularly in the short term, no. it doesn't lead to any new momentum around the removal of sanctions. What it does, though, is obviously place the Zimbabwean government in a position where it can justify its economic policies to say that we respect private property. But if you look at comments coming from some of the main embassies in Zimbabwe around this deal, the compensation deal, they have not praised it. They have not said it is a good deal. In fact, they're talking more about human rights violations than anything else. So it doesn't seem to be, in the short term at least, a measure that will change the shifts of global Western superpowers around sanctions or perspectives and perceptions of what should happen in Zimbabwe. This deal doesn't do that. In the long term, it also sort of like may have potential, but essentially, again, because of the initial response of governments that have imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe, it is least likely that this deal will move them away from a sanction sort of approach on Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your responses, Mr. Zhangazha, and thank you very much for participating in this interview. I would want to invite you to like and follow the conversation on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I usually sit with academics, students, bloggers, correspondents, newspaper article writers to have a discussion of the issues affecting Zimbabwe and many other developing countries. Thank you very much for participating.
But I still have one point.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
I think the key issue about this compensation deal is the fact that it sanctifies private property. And in history, what we've learned, like people in the global south, what we've learned is that normally even after our revolutions, there's always like a pushback for the fact that we must respect private property. And reading through history, you'll find that in Haiti or even in Zimbabwe, as is the case now, you can tell that property rights are then returned after a revolution. Property rights in the sense that people would then ask and inquire, oh, you guys did a revolution, so why are you not giving us back our rights to the property that we acquired? Never mind, we acquired it unfairly. We want it back. And this is the case in Zimbabwe's instance, where the former white commercial farmers are saying, compensate us for that land, otherwise you don't get back into the global economic system. And our government is now sacrificing the people of Zimbabwe around and over that, particularly by incurring a new debt to compensate people for land that was illegally acquired in the first place.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much for that last point. And thank you very much for participating in these interviews, Mr. Zhangazha. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you.